Hey guys, it's Miss Thurston. In this lesson, we are going to talk about the 8 tribes, one nation, the American Indians of North Carolina. I wanted to do this lesson because I think it's important to recognize the contributions the Native Americans have had to North Carolina that can still be felt today, even in modern day North Carolina. I had the privilege of going to school near the Lumbee Indian tribe when I attended the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. Just the name Pembroke has its roots in Native American culture. And we're going to talk a little bit later in the presentation of all the other Native American influences that can be felt in North Carolina. In your interactive notebook, you will be taking your Cornell style notes that we set up earlier in class, and you'll be uploading a picture of those notes later into Canvas for credit. So if you have your pen or pencil ready, let's get started. Take a look at this map. What do you see? You should see certain counties colored with arrows pointing to them. Well, there's only 8 colors with 8 arrows. Some of them are grayed out. What do you think these represent? If you made connection with 8 and 8 with the title of the presentation, did you guess 8 tribes and where they might be located, or the majority of their population located today? You're absolutely right. There are 8 tribes that are federally and state recognized in North Carolina, with the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians the only federally recognized tribe in North Carolina. The rest are state recognized tribes in North Carolina. The counties that are highlighted with color are where their tribe offices are located and where the majority of their members reside. But the influences of Native Americans can be felt across all corners of North Carolina, from the Neuse River to cities like Chocowinity, Hatteras Island. All of those have their roots in Native American language and culture. This map should look fairly familiar. It's a representation of how historians and anthropologists think that the first human life developed in Africa millions of years ago and slowly migrated their way over the land masses. About 10,000 years ago, humans migrated over the Bering Land Bridge to the North American continent. Historians and anthropologists estimate that humans first appeared in the area that is now North Carolina between 10,000 and 8,000 BC. The first humans were called archaic peoples, or as our other article called it, Paleo-Indians. They were nomads that roamed in search for food and supplies. They used simple tools made of stone and wood, but they didn't have any common traits in 3 key areas that we associate with Native Americans today: bow and arrows, pottery, and an agricultural economy and community. We learned about the Woodland culture in our first article. Around 2000 BC is when they began the transition to the more modern day Native Americans that we associate with American Indians today. They were hunting and gathering people that began to transition to the more farming and agricultural communities that we see today. They farmed corn, sunflower, squash, and beans. They developed more sophisticated technologies for hunting, including the bow and arrow. They settled into semi-permanent and permanent villages, and they adopted more sophisticated and intricate political and economic systems that included hierarchical societies um, from the Mississippi and other prehistoric cultures. They were based on society, or they they were they were based on status or wealth or prestige earned in war. They were also um, contributions made to society were recognized or lack thereof. Take a look at the this map of the Native American tribes as historians think they were in in 1550. Notice how many tribes are on this map. Way more than 8, correct? So, how in the world did we go from this many tribes to only 8 state and federally recognized tribes in modern day North Carolina? One phrase: European settlers and explorers. So, what in the world happened after Native American encountered European settlers and explorers? When Indian groups met by European explorer, most of the Indian groups met by early European explorers were practicing economic and settlement patterns that close of that of the woodland cultures. So in 1550, there were about 100,000 Native Americans living in what is considered present day North Carolina. However, by 1800, that number had fallen to about 20,000. So in a span of about 250 years, that number had dropped dramatically. What could have possibly have caused this? Well, in order to understand what could have possibly have caused this, we're going to look at just 3 of the largest tribes in North Carolina at the time: the Cherokee, the Catawba, and the Tuscarora. What happened to these tribes is very representative of what happened to most of the other tribes that were in North Carolina at the time, which is why we didn't look at them when we read our first article for our graphic organizer last week. Let's take a look at the Tuscarora first. The Tuscarora lived in the coastal plain region of North Carolina along the Pamlico and Neuse rivers. As the number of European settlers grew, they began to clash with the Tuscarora, both fighting for land and resources. The settlers refused to allow the Tuscarora to hunt near their farms, and the settlers repeatedly broke treaties designed for peace. They in turn often captured the Tuscarora and sold them into slavery. The Tuscarora attempted to leave North Carolina, but many of the surrounding colonies passed laws that prevented the Tuscarora from settling into their lands. In 1711, war broke out when the Tuscarora began attacking farms and killing the settlers in an attempt to take back their native lands. This became known as the Tuscarora War, that lasted between 1711 to 1715. The result was a resounding defeat for the Tuscarora. When all was said and done, 1,400 Tuscarora were killed, and another 1,000 were sold into slavery. Those who survived left North Carolina and settled in New York, where they joined the Iroquois Confederacy, and those who remained in North Carolina were relocated to an area in Bertie County. When the Europeans arrived, they brought with them diseases like smallpox, typhus, cholera, and measles, and those diseases wreaked havoc on the native populations all throughout North and South America. The Catawba were no exception to the ravages of these diseases. And according to some estimates, the Catawba numbered nearly 5,000 in the 1600s, but by the 1780s, their numbers dwindled down to 300. Perhaps one of the most heartbreaking stories were that of the Cherokee. The Cherokee lived in the mountains of western North Carolina, and including in parts of Georgia, South Carolina, Kentucky, and Alabama. They had originally allied with the British colonists in their fight against the French in the French and Indian War from 1754 to 1763, but they began attacking Europeans after some of the Cherokee were killed by settlers in Virginia. In return for peace, the British promised the Cherokee that no white settlements would be allowed west of the Appalachian Mountains. But just like with the Tuscarora, those promises were broken. During the American Revolution from 1775 to 1783, the Cherokee sided with the British. The Cherokee thought that they had a strategic advantage in doing this. They thought if the British won, the British would protect their land from further settlement, and the British would give them back some of the land that the colonists had taken. However, no such luck. The British were defeated in the war and were forced to give up all of their lands east of the Blue Ridge Mountains. The conflicts with the Cherokee continued well after the war and into the 1790s. In 1792, the United States government promised to protect the Cherokee land from further settlement. But as before, promises were made to be broken. Throughout the 1830s, many Cherokee across the southeastern United States were forcibly relocated to Oklahoma. The first time was during the Indian Removal Act. The second time was in an even more memorable act called the Trail of Tears. Both we will study later on in American history. Many Cherokee in North Carolina managed to avoid U.S. troops by hiding out in the mountains, the advantage of being on your home turf. These Cherokee later joined with other Native Americans who were allowed to stay in North Carolina to form the present-day Eastern Band of Cherokee. So here's your second assignment. What would you do? Choose one of the three tribes we just discussed, the Tuscarora, the Catawba, or the Cherokee, and imagine that you were a member of the tribe during one of the following time periods. The Tuscarora, just after the Tuscarora War in 1750, the Catawba in the 1780s, when disease had ravaged your numbers down to 300, or the Cherokee in 1775, when you're fighting the colonists, or in the 1830s, when you're being removed from your lands. Assuming the role of the tribe's leader, write a short 2 to 3 paragraph diary entry about the difficulties facing your tribe and decide on a course of action for your tribe and explain the reason or reasons for your decision. You will upload this diary entry to Canvas for credit. If you need help, don't be afraid to ask. Hope you enjoyed this. Don't forget to upload your notes to Canvas for credit as well.